Well, it's like 6:28. Should we just get started? I know they said they were on their way, but we started at 6:30 for a reason. We can't just wait every single week for some indeterminate amount of time until people show up late, so I think we just gotta fire. Alright, pack one. Pass it to the left. Remember to zone draft, everybody. Oh no. Here he comes.
You're late.
A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
With God as my co-pilot. By that I mean Sadie standing next to me, looking at me wantingly. We begin a new episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy, and I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony, a better friend than Samwise Gamgee Maddox.
Aw, that can't be true. Sam did all kinds of great stuff. He carried the guy.
Yeah, I think just basically, I think he was just bored. I don't, is he a great friend, or did he just have really nothing else going on in his life?
Great friend, or was that like a really toxic work relationship?
Because
he was
a little
Frodo's
bit of codependence.
Employee.
Well, is he Frodo's employee?
I think so, right? He was his gardener.
It's been a long time since I've read these books.
It's actually, now that I'm thinking about it, kind of messed up. But, good on you, Sam. You did great.
I think he just didn't have a lot going on. Nothing going on in Sam's life, and maybe some codependence problems there. But, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, never cooked a beautiful meal for him, right?
I think that was, he was his gardener, but he was also really into
Where's the
cooking.
Hospitality?
They're all
into food, but was he into cooking specifically?
I assume so.
Well, hit us up in the comments below with examples of Samwise Gamgee cooking in the Lord of the Rings series. We're going to be looking for specific annotations. I need page numbers, etc. Thanks, commenters. Anthony, this is our 3rd anniversary episode, which I just noticed as I numbered the file before I hit save. 3 years of doing this podcast.
That's hard to believe. It continues to feel like it's been about 8 months.
Yep, so that's exciting. And it is also our Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth. Yes, that said it right. There's no the in there. Set review, or at least the first of 2. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the mechanics in the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth and, by proxy, Tales of Middle-earth Commander. And then we're also going to be looking at the cards that we are interested in including in our own cubes from this set. Or maybe you don't have any of those?
I have a couple.
Okay. Last night you said you didn't want to read cards. And I said, you know what? It's valid to just not want to add... This show is about our experience with the game. If your experience with the game is I'm not going to read these cards, I'll add these to my cube later. That's the thing you can say.
That is a big part of my experience with the game right now is that keep printing Magic cards, and a great thing about playing Cube is I can just ignore a lot of them if I want to. But I did do some skimming of the set. I did find a couple things I'm interested in, and there are some this is an interesting set in terms of the mechanics in it as well, so I'm interested in talking about that from a sort of bigger, high-level perspective.
People are excited about this set, which I feel like happens when the cards are powerful, which is a bummer, because who cares if the cards are powerful? I know competitive constructed players do. I think there's some interesting cards.
I think people are also excited about Lord of the Rings.
That too. I think this kind of reminds me a little bit of the 40K stuff. I feel like you get the sense from looking at the set that Wizards of the Coast spent a lot of time designing these cards, put their best and brightest on them because they really cared about their investment in this IP. Which is to say, they spent a lot of money on the IP, so they better get their money back with a good designs.
What is your relationship to Lord of the Rings?
When I was a young boy, I learned to read fairly young.
Okay, and I thought you were going to say learn to read Elvish.
I learned to read fairly young, and I went through a phase quite early in my life when I was a very voracious reader. I'm going to say 2nd to 5th grade.
Okay.
And in this time, I read all the Lord of the Rings. I read all of The Hobbit. I read a lot of the Redwall series. I read all these books, way more books than I've read as an adult. And then I just kind of I think honestly what happened is I discovered video games in 5th grade, and I was like, these books are out.
The higher art form.
Why would I read books anymore? But so I read them all back then, and I was a fan, but I was a child. A child. I feel like most people tend to get into Lord of the Rings maybe when they're in middle school.
Yeah, that's probably when I read it. Middle school or maybe early high school.
Yeah, I was significantly younger, but I was really into high fantasy at the time, so I read it back then, and then I, like everyone else on the planet, saw the movies when they came out and think they're fun. I've actually kind of been wanting to rewatch the movies. could be fun, maybe. I don't know. Hillary's never seen them, which is weird, because she does like big, epic...
Yeah.
Like, she's kind of into the better Avengers movies, which I'm not personally, but she likes them, so I think she would like the Lord of the Rings movies, because they're kind of unobjectionably great, right?
Yeah, I think they were pretty good. I did just recently watch the new series, and I was, like, really put off by it. But yeah, I'd rewatch those.
I didn't even know there was a new series.
Yeah, it's on one of those streaming services we don't have to name.
Yeah, what's not? So yeah, I'm not, like, a super fan. Like, I don't remember Sam doing any cooking, or didn't remember who was his gardener. Like, I don't remember these things about it.
Key plot details.
But I almost feel like I was a fan in a prior life. That's how long ago I feel like I was emotionally invested in these stories. So yeah, that's kind of my relationship with Lord of the Rings. What about you?
Similar. I mean, like you mentioned, I did all the things normal people do. I read them when I was probably in like middle school or high school, and then watched the movies when they came out. I remember reading through these cards, a lot of the characters, some of the deep cuts, honestly, barely remember Bill the Pony. I would not have been able to, recall that unless you put this card in front of me. I'm like, okay, I kind of remember that. There's definitely deep cuts that I'm not getting, but I get the broad strokes. I do also really appreciate that these don't just feel like screenshots from the movie. Like, it feels like this is their own take on this set, which is, to me, a lot more engaging. I really dislike that when, when a reprinting of a book comes out after a movie was released, and they slap a movie screenshot on it. It's like, the book was its own nice thing before the movie came out.
It's funny, I remember many times over the years you saying that exact thing. I can hear you saying that in college.
I can't recall myself ever saying that before.
I hadn't thought about it forever, but I can hear you making that exact same complaint. Like, this was a book before it was a movie. Why are you slapping a photograph from the movie on here?
And obviously we know why. You don't have to explain why, but it does feel
because like actors are hot.
Sure,
it's cheaper than hiring an illustrator.
Okay, that's not it.
Book cover design is hard.
That's probably true.
So we got a new set and a corresponding commander product for us to sink our teeth into, and I think people are quite excited about a few of these cards. We got some very early previews of this a while ago, like before the most recent set. I remember I thought Reprieve, the white remand, was in the last set, and I remember looking for it in our set survey, like, what the heck? I saw this white remand, but that was like a very early preview of some of the early Lord of the Rings cards. So now we got the whole thing, and I think it's high time that we talk about it for Cube. Let's take the mechanics first, though, as we always do. So we're looking at the article on the Mothership, written by Matt Tabak. This will be linked in the show notes, of course. And for those that are new to the show, we also keep track of all the cards we mention in chronological order and make a visual spoiler on our website. So you can find that by clicking the link in the show notes. I'm not going to read URLs on the air. This is an audio format.
No, I mean, should we even clarify what show notes are? I feel like maybe people don't get that. If you're in your podcast
notes
app,
about the show.
They're the notes in the show that are right there under the episode, or you can go to our website and click on podcast and click on the latest episode. And we always have links to all the stuff that we mentioned, as well as a description of the show, and like you said, that cards page, which hopefully is useful to people that are following along.
I think it's more useful than I actually give it credit for, because every once in a while we'll miss a card and multiple people will tell me. And I'm like, not only are you looking at it, but you're looking at it closely enough that you realize that a card was missing. So people are using it. It's worth the effort. That's what I keep telling myself, at least, when I'm recording all the cards we mention as I'm editing the podcast. All right, so the mechanics of The Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth. The first one, Anthony, is the ring, of course. And the ring tempts you, which is the printed mechanic on a number of cards. This is a outside the game initiative monarch style
dungeon
ability.
Kind of thing.
It explore the dungeon kind of thing. So the first time you play a card that has the text "The Ring Tempts You," you get an emblem named the Ring, and this is a lot like those reminder cards for all those other mechanics we just mentioned. Every time the ring tempts you, two things happen. First, you have to choose a creature you control to become the ring bearer. And if you have a ring bearer, you may choose that to have the creature remain the ring bearer, or may choose another creature you control to carry the burden.
Or if you have no creatures, you don't get a ring bearer, but you still do whatever the effect is.
And then you get one of these chronological abilities of the ring. So the first one is your ring bearer is legendary and can't be blocked by creatures with greater power.
Flavorful.
So
getting sneaky in there.
Skulky kind of mechanic. The second is whenever your ring bearer attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. The third is whenever your ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller sacrifices it at the end of combat. And the last is whenever your ring bearer deals combat damage to a player, each opponent loses 3 life. So as you gain each of these abilities, they just stack with each other. So eventually you have a ring bearer essentially with all of these powerful abilities. And I guess whenever the ring tempts you after that, you can choose to switch your ring bearer.
Right, so you can move your ring bearer around, but the effect doesn't grant those abilities to the creature. It grants those abilities to your ring, which affects whoever your current ring bearer is.
Yes.
Which matters for things like threat and effects. If somebody steals your ring bearer, I'm pretty sure that they don't get those effects on it because their ring is not powered up.
So you're kind of like basically leveling up this equipment throughout the game by continually having the ring tempt you, and then you have this powerful equipment you get to move around. It's not literally an equipment in the game sense. It is this, outside the game object. So it's interesting amalgamation of all of these different style of mechanics. I know some people are frustrated that the ring is only a positive mechanic, and there is no downside to the ring tempting you, Anthony. How do you feel about this?
I don't want to be too salty about this, because it's easy to be salty about Magic player. It's easy to be salty about someone taking, a thing that you enjoy, you appreciate, and reimagine it, and not reimagine it in the way that you think. But I'm going to be a little bit salty about it, because it's called Lord of the Rings. The ring is right there in the title, and the one thing about the ring is it's evil, and it corrupts you and destroys you. So them to say, like, we're going to make this set, we're going to make this new artistic reinterpretation of the Lord of the Evil Ring, and it just be like, it's pretty good. It's good to be the ring bearer, is kind of not a really flavorful, compelling interpretation of that to me.
It honestly,
it's kind of like when Monopoly was taken from the, nice, who was it? It was a Shaker woman that designed Monopoly as a way to demonstrate that monopolies are evil and landlords are problematic, and then they were just like, oh, now the Monopoly is great. Like, we've reinterpreted this game as it's all positive. It feels similar to that to me.
They are very smart people working in R&D, and I'm sure they had
tried
hours and
very
hours
hard.
and hours of conversations about this, and I don't want to suggest that they didn't think about this or, it wasn't on their radar, but it really feels like a poetic encapsulation of how Magic cards are designed today, which is to say that they never have downsides.
I'm not saying
everything's always good for you, always, forever, and always.
I'm not saying they did bad game design. I'm saying they made uncompelling art.
Well, Yeah, so I think even in some Blogatog posts, or maybe even a drive to work, I haven't listened to the latest couple, maybe Marcus talked about how they tried to design the ring with downside mechanic, and it just wasn't fun, and seeing as it's central to the entire set and mentioned on a huge number of cards, having that core mechanic not be fun, obviously is a huge problem. I guess we have to take them at their word that, they tried all they could. I feel like it's definitely possible the ring is such a perfect, the promise of power with this, corrupting downside. I feel like is a thing we see in Magic all the time, right? And honestly, I think the card, the One Ring, kind of captures this a little better, a little bit at least.
Right.
At least there is a downside. I've seen people die to their own the One Ring in Constructed so far, just some videos on YouTube. So that, I think, maybe is where that is a little better captured. Here, this mechanic, I think in terms of its connection to the prior art, maybe a little bit of a letdown in terms of what it actually does.
Yeah.
For the purposes of cube designers, people might be looking to include just a couple cards that maybe say the ring tempts you, and for those purposes, you can basically just look at what the first level of this the ring tempts you thing does, which is give your ring bearer legendary status and make it so it has effectively Skulk, which is like a little rider basically tacked onto a lot of spells. So, big picture. I don't love these kind of mechanics that require a whole outside the game piece, where you have a little piece of text on a card, and what that actually refers to has to be informed by another thing. We've seen this as card design has gotten more complex, as there's more and more digital play. We've seen the initiative, the enter of a dungeon, all this stuff where it's like you get a little thing that says, do a dungeon, and then you have to choose between these three things, and they all have different rules on them. I don't love the complexity of that. I don't love that you can't look at a card and know what it does without prior knowledge of what this token does. But compared to all those other implementations, I think this is maybe my favorite of this kind of mechanic, because the ring is so important to this story.
Right.
And I think it is, for the set itself, a much more reasonable... It's a very reasonable design solution to having this core thing that is technically presented on, the card, the One Ring. But for the most part, the ring in reference here to the ring tempts you mechanic is not present on a game piece. It is just referenced by many other game pieces. And so I think mechanically this lines up with the importance of this object that doesn't actually exist on a card in the story in a way that is fairly successful. But from a cube design perspective, I feel the same way about this as I do about the initiative or whatever. I'm just not looking at any cards with the words "the ring tempts you" on it.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And Mark actually pointed out in his podcast that this is the only new mechanic in the set, really. There's a couple little twists of things. There's a couple of mechanics they're bringing back.
Right, Amass Orcs is just Amass, but now they're orcs.
But we changed a type. That's not a huge deal, or a subtype, I should say. So yeah, they really decided that this is the important part of making this set come alive and feel like it is a Lord of the Rings set that you're playing with, so they decided to put all of their complexity points into this one mechanic, and that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like this is, a mechanic that makes sense in the context of Limited, when you have multiple cards that are going to put you on this journey of upgrading your ring and passing it around to between your characters that are fighting this war for you, fighting this battle, and being your ring bearer. That all makes a lot of sense. When it is just 1 or 2 cards put into a cube, then it is just an implementation style. Like if it basically essentially just gives one creature skulk, they could have just written that on the card. So it's not going to make it's not going to make sense on just 1 or 2 cards in a cube, I don't think.
It will literally work. Like it's not actually, parasitic or whatever, where you can't have one card with the ring Tempts you and have it not be good. And I know we'll see people throwing that word around and saying, well, if you don't have a whole package, it doesn't work. It does literally work. It's just a ton of complexity and overhead for what is ultimately a pretty simple thing if you only have a small handful of cards with the ring Tempts you on it.
And they're certainly not going to be power maximized.
And if I had one game design critique of the ring Tempts you, it's that we saw a lot of bread and butter cards that just had the ring Tempts you slapped on them in this set, which I think makes a lot of sense.
That also makes sense, yeah.
It makes sense. I guess it's not a game design critique so much as it is a bummer for me as a cube designer, because here are all these cards that are just ruled out. Like we finally got a card I've wanted for a long time, which is a little better disfigure in Golem's Bite.
Oh, sure.
But what it does is the ring Tempts you. You can exile a card from your graveyard and pay, I think, 3 and a black and have the ring tempt you. We got the better disfigure, but because it's associated with this overly wrought, again, like flagship core, fairly complicated mechanic, it's not going to work in any of my cubes, so...
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually see this downside. Like, we have this suite of bread and butter effects that have this mechanic stapled onto it, and that's all upside from my perspective, because if somebody does want to make this work in a, big, flavorful way in a cube, you can really easily just grab that suite of effects, put it in, and now you have a sort of critical mass of cards to make it shine. And also just break singleton on, the shocks or whatever that have the ring Tempts you written on it. If someone wants to make their own Lord of the Rings set cube, they can easily sort of take that set of cards, take whatever else they make sense, but then, mix in some cards from Throne of Eldraine or from Dominaria that, flavorfully have enough of that high fantasy feel that it's still going to work well as a cube together. And there's a lot of that out there, certainly. Yeah. I mean, I think part of the reason why they didn't need more new mechanics for this set is that Magic is a high fantasy IP that is full of a bunch of mechanics that are already kind of meant for a high fantasy world. Which brings us to Amass Orcs. So, as we mentioned, this is essentially bringing back Amass. Amass was the mechanic from War of the Spark, where you would amass X, and this was an ability written on spells or creatures or any kind of other way it could be triggered. And you basically would make a zombie army token, or in this case, an orc army token, if you didn't have one already, and then put X +1/+1 counters on it. So if you already have one, amass 2 means put 2 +1/+1 counters on your existing orc army. If you don't have one, it means make an orc army and put this many +1/+1 counters on it. Basically a way to make a token of a different size. These cards do work totally fine in isolation. I, in fact, have just 2 random amass cards in my cube, and they basically just say, make a token, and that token also has +1/+1 counters, which interacts with some more stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I think these cards work well in all kinds of volumes. Yeah, the fact that they do have +1/+1 counters specifically also makes them, I think, tie in nicely with a bunch of other cards in Magic's history. Callus's Missile is one of the ones you run that I see a lot of cubes tend to include that has original amass on it. And now we have just a flavorful change of amass where you amass orcs instead of amass zombies, which I guess could be kind of weird if you're playing them side by side with each other in the same set. If you have a cube that has Callus's Missile and some amass orcs card in it, maybe that could be strange, but ultimately I think no. It just makes a token. That token is a certain size. So right. And it actually gains both of the types if you amass zombies and then amass orcs. Huh? It becomes an orc zombie army. Oh, right. Yeah, I do remember this. Okay, I actually have forgotten about this, that they actually do overlap with each other instead of making separate tokens. Yeah, so you do still always end up with one army token, which is actually, that's a good point. It does overlap a little bit or interact specifically with changelings, because army is a creature type, so if you have a changeling, it is an army, so you would actually put those counters onto one of your changelings. Has that been true of Amass? That was previously already? True, yeah. Wow. Huh. That's never come up in any of the games I've played. If it's come up in games, it could definitely happen in my cube, and if it has, I've missed it. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I've never realized that. I guess I thought that the zombie army token was referring to the token name zombie army. Yeah. Not, I mean, flavorfully, either of those implementations would make sense, but it's kind of just you got one army and it's got the squadron of zombies and the squadron of orcs, and it's just got all those types now. Yeah.
Other returning mechanics, we have food as a big theme of this set, which of course is very appropriate for the original IP. These are the tokens you can pay to and sacrifice to gain 3 life. They're artifact tokens, and I think in this set we see especially a lot of like Food Matters cards in which you do other things with food tokens, which effectively makes them like a, third resource or whatever.
Which I think makes a lot of sense. One of the issues that maybe there was in Throne of Eldraine with the first time they created food tokens was the games could go a little long when there was just like a lot of incidental life gain. People would just gain a bunch of life and drag out the games.
I remember this.
So I think they've changed a little bit their approach to what are the cards that care about food and create food, and they're more about using it as a resource and using it in a proactive way, which I think is just going to make the gameplay a lot better. And for people that already have some light food themes in their cube, is obviously going to be a great opportunity to bolster that theme.
It's also a great demonstration of how you can change people's in-game behavior with the cards you give them access to, right? Like effectively, all food has the ability to pay 2, sacrifice it to gain 3 life. All they need to do is introduce a bunch of cards that give you a better effect for sacrificing the food than gaining 3 life.
Right.
And you're basically incentivized to now no longer gain life and draw games out, and instead use them for other purposes. So yeah, I think that there's a ton of food cards in this set. I didn't actually look at the count, but there's a lot of them. I know that all my Academy Manufactor cubers out there are...
Oh, yeah.
Right? Is that care about food? It's food, treasures,
food,
and
treasure,
blood?
And clues. I don't think that one cares
Not
about blood.
Yeah. I know all my Academy Manufactor cubers out there have their sights set on all these food cards.
Yeah, we've got 26 new cards that either make food or care about food in some way. Actually, that's just in not the Commander set, so there's probably even more.
Yeah, the Commander set's probably got a bunch. We also see a return of Landcycling, I believe just on these 5 cards, 1 in each color. And importantly, these are typed Landcycling, so Island Cycling, Plain Cycling, Mountain Cycling, etc., for only 1 generic mana. The first time we've ever seen that before.
That is a powerful upgrade from 2 mana, as we've seen it before, just to 1 mana.
Yeah, really good, I think. Especially, this set doesn't have any type duels or anything, so you're just actually getting a basic land in this set with it. But outside of the set, in cubes and whatnot, effectively 1 mana to go get your dual land or your triome or whatever, I think is very powerful. I think these cards are maybe being overlooked by some cube designers initially because they're like not the most exciting on rate in terms of what they're doing, but don't overlook this typed Landcycling for only 1. And then also, I gotta say, I'm a connoisseur of these creatures. At least I consider myself a connoisseur of these creatures. I used to play a cycling deck in Commander, and cycling is a theme of the Neoclassical cube, which we'll be talking about on this episode, believe it or not. And over the years, the rate on these creatures has just gotten pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed.
Yeah.
And now you just get a 6 mana, 6/4 trample that when it attacks gives something else, +2/+0 and trample. And also it has Mountain Cycling for 1. And that's a lot of value to staple onto a card that in a more lean, low-to-the-ground environment is mostly just like a tapped dual land, right? Like just go get a dual land, tapped,
right?
Basically. I think all these cards are really good, and I always love seeing cycling come back. Love that mechanic.
Yeah, it's definitely not at the power level of fetches and shocks or fetches and duels, but it is still just like a different twist on cycling that I think will hang in a lot of still
it's
pretty
not too
high-powered
far off.
environments.
Imagine if these were all modal double face cards where the backside was instead a dual land of whatever your color was, and the front side was this creature, right?
Yeah.
You're paying 1 mana for it, but you get the land put in your hand, you can then play the land untapped. So, right, you're still paying essentially 1 tapped land for this effect. And the backside of these cards, the front side, the non-cycling side of these cards is competitively costed, I think, for modern card design standards. So,
yeah. And even better, they're not double face cards.
That's true. And even better than not double face cards. I've already played a couple of these in the Jund cube of T-Pug, and they definitely hold their own. So don't overlook those. We also see Sagas returning. Are Sagas not deciduous at this point? I feel like
they're pretty deciduous.
Yeah,
we see them pretty often. We saw them in Kamigawa and other places.
Yeah, so Sagas are back here. The one thing I did notice here is that there's a couple of Sagas that have many more than 3 chapters, or some other weird permutations of Sagas. I'm looking here at the long list of Ents, which has the same chapter just 6 times. So you get the same trigger 6 times, once every turn. So I think they're pushing maybe the limits of that structure. It's obviously the same rules. Everything still works the same way, but you're not just seeing chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 like we've seen on most Sagas in the past. So that's kind of cool.
And I think that even though these are some different twists, they're still very readable. It's just this has 2 steps that are the same. We just double up that rules text. No problem.
Yeah, I think once you've learned what Sagas are, they lend themselves to being adjusted and stretched a little bit and are very intuitive in doing so. They also mentioned that historic is mentioned in this set, which does that really matter?
Historic is a weird thing for them to call out here because the two examples they give
don't have the word historic.
And I think there's only 3 or 4 cards that actually care about historic, but there are a ton of things that care about legends.
Yes.
So I think that
Legendary Matters is the real theme here more than historic, I would say. I know that a couple cube designers have already been pursuing Legends Matter themes in their cubes because of this set, specifically in Boros sometimes, or even in other colors. So definitely something to look at if you care about the legendary super type, or maybe think you might want to care about the legendary super type, because there's a ton of support for Legends Matter in this set, which of course makes sense. I think something else we've observed about lots of set design is that there's always just a shit ton of legendary creatures in every single set these days for Commander.
Yep.
But this is one place where it is really appropriate. I mean, this is a IP with a bunch of proper noun characters that have names and histories, so I would fully expect this set to be full of a bunch of legends, and it makes sense to have some Legends Matter stuff alongside it. And the last thing they mentioned here is stun counters. Can we make stun counters evergreen yet? I love stun counters.
I thought those were evergreen. I thought they introduced it and they're like, here's this one card with stun counters, and they're going to be here all the time.
Yeah, I thought there were 2. Anyway, they mentioned it in this article, so at least I saw the one card with stun counters, that big mythic blue card. So yeah, those are in the set as well. I like stun counters. Hopefully those just keep coming back. Do you have other thoughts about the overall mechanics of this set? There's a lot to dig into. We really just kind of scraped the surface. This is the official name mechanics. In terms of unnamed stuff, the Legendary Matters thing is a big thing.
That's really,
There's
I think,
a bunch of other things that are woven through this.
I think the Legendary Matters is actually just one of the biggest themes of the set, even though it's kind of not really something they're making the highlight of, but it does flavorfully make sense. And I think what's cool about it is it does let us look back and recontextualize a lot of cards, because now we have all these payoffs for Legends Matter. Not that there weren't a lot already, but now we're adding another 50 of them. And you can go back and look at all the tremendous amount of legendary creatures that they've been printing and think of them in a different way that maybe you could actually, across many different colors, seed in a legendary theme. Something else we see in a pretty reasonable volume is Scry Matters. I don't think in
there was like a whole Commander
cubes,
deck basically that's about Scry Matters in the Commander product.
I don't think there's quite enough Scry in your average cube if you haven't been thinking about it to make a lot of these Scry Matters payoffs work, but I don't think it would be a huge leap. There are obviously a ton of cards throughout the history of Magic that have Scry, and it's kind of like
it's a great
fun thing to do. I kind of like it in the same way that I like the cast your second spell or draw your second card mechanics, that it's pretty easy to support with cards that you already want to be playing. So there's also a ton of creature type matters in this set, which makes sense because when we're thinking about Lord of the Rings, it's about armies of orcs and the legions of, or the cavalry of humans and the domain of elves. And we see all these things come through. There's a ton of human creature type matters support, which is something I think a fair number of cubers end up focusing on just because it is pretty easy. There are a lot of humans throughout Magic, so if you want some more payoff cards for it, there will be plenty of them here. We see a unique twist on elves in that there are elves in blue, which I don't think we've seen much before, which if you're looking to support your elf creature type matters theme in a different way, you can explore some of that, and that overlaps a lot with the Scry Matters as well, which is interesting. And then lastly, we have the Amass, we have the goblins and orcs, and a lot of support for payoffs for having goblins and orcs, and interestingly, those are batched together, which I think makes sense because they want them to work within the set and be flavorful to the armies of goblins and orcs, but also it makes them a little bit more backwards compatible because there are just a lot more goblins in the history of Magic.
Which those of us with Goblin Commander decks are very grateful for.
Nice. One other thing I'd mention is that they've changed a little bit the way they use keyword abilities, which I've noticed a bunch in this set, where in the past they've avoided using a lot of keyword abilities outside of the set where it really mattered. So like a great example is Landfall. When they printed Tireless Tracker originally, they didn't put Landfall on it because Landfall wasn't in the set. Recently, they've said, that doesn't really make sense. Let's just be consistent about using these keyword abilities, and we'll see a bunch of them throughout here. In fact, if you go back and look at Tireless Tracker, they've even eroded it to now have Landfall, which I think this is actually a great change for cube design. It's kind of awkward where it's like, oh, this card has Battlecry, and this one has Battlecry as well, but it doesn't label it because it wasn't in a set with Battlecry. Now, when you see reprints of those cards, and you see a lot of cards in the set, that will just include those keyword abilities, which I think makes everything a little bit more consistent, even if it adds a little bit more complexity within the set. It's better for cube.
One of the very few benefits of designing for an eternal world, as it were, to us at least.
To us, yeah. I mean, all those benefits are benefits for Commander players.
Yeah, sure. Anything else about the set overall before we get into our personal cube inclusions?
I don't think I have anything else. I mean, It's obviously a set that is geared towards Commander in a lot of ways because there are just so many legends, and a lot of those legends will point you in very focused directions. So I think that's maybe the other thing I would call out is take a look at those legends and maybe they can sort of indicate another theme, another archetype that you could try and seed into particular colors.
I gotta say, from looking at the card designs themselves, this didn't feel to me like it was as directed at Commander as maybe some sets do, which I think just evidence of the fact that I think they gave the limited format here a big focus.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Which I think sometimes it's easy for us to dismiss these, universes beyond things and assume like, how's this ever actually bring new people into the game? But, if you're like a super fan of Lord of the Rings, maybe you're not a Magic player, you basically just got like a fantastic Lord of the Rings card game, right? Which uses all of the prior art of Magic, which has been developed for 30 years, and as most of us listening know, is the greatest game on the planet. And now you have a Lord of the Rings card game that has all of that robust rules behind it, all of the support of that big engine. So I think they thought a lot about people that were just going to buy some packs and play either limited games or even just like kind of kitchen table, like we're going to buy a booster box and we're going to make our Lord of the Rings decks and just play our Lord of the Rings card game with each other. And in those contexts, the multiplayer stuff and it doesn't feel to me like this was a Commander product in the way that some other sets have definitely felt like, wow, every single one of these cards works better in multiplayer and,
Sure.
is, very clearly designed in that context. Here it feels like a lot of these cards are definitely meant to be really good in limited, in just like retail one-on-one zero-sum Magic.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that, something else that really ties into that is we do see a lot of these named characters at lower rarities or on multiple cards, which really speaks to the fact that they want players that are opening smaller volumes of this set, whether that's, like you're saying, just buy a box to play their Lord of the Rings card game or just playing sealed with these.
Gotta get a Gandalf.
They want those named characters to be present because that is really important to the story.
I also think very savvily that having like 6 Gandalf cards or whatever means that you avoid the criticism of like, oh, you made the Gandalf card and it wasn't what I think is good.
That's a great point, yeah.
There's like a million Gandalf cards, so it's like, find the one that, best suits you. There is no canonical Gandalf in Magic, which I think was probably a third rail they didn't want to go near.
Sure.
I'll talk about the Neoclassical cube very briefly. This cube obviously is not going to be talked about very much in our set reviews because it's all entirely old border. Or, importantly, cards I feel like could have been designed in old border.
Or whatever.
It's old border or things that I feel like fit the old border themes. And here, specifically, the typed Landcycling cards are coming up. I'm trying all of them except for the green one, which refers to food tokens. So I want to make food tokens, so get that right out of here. But all the other ones I'm giving a shot. I'm particularly excited about the black one and the red one. The actual rules text, not that super important. But what is important to me here, and what I actually want to kind of press you on a little bit, at what point do these cards just have a rate that is too good to feel old school anymore?
I think these are past that line.
You think they're past this line?
Yeah.
You think when you look at Oliphant compared to Chartooth Cougar, it's like so much better on rate that it just feels completely out of place?
Yeah, I think so.
And do you think if I was to only include the newer rate ones so that it wasn't like you have these two cards in the same pack and it feels like this big disconnect, do you think that on rate these modern ones line up favorably to like other stuff that other decks can be doing in that cube in such a way where it's like, I did my cool old school themed thing, you just played 6 lands and played an Oliphant, and now your deck's doing something better than mine? Is that something you think will happen?
I think that is exactly what's going to happen.
Okay. I mean, it's good to know.
I mean, it's worth trying them. It's always worth testing things, but that's kind of my expectation. And that's feedback that I know you've gotten from some players that have actually played with some of these cards, is that, yeah, it just feels like you kind of got this modal card for free. It's like there's your mana fixing, but oops, it accidentally is a card that's just better than any card in my deck. And that doesn't feel great to me.
Wasn't that you giving me that feedback?
No, that was Parker.
Oh, sure, right, that was Parker. Yeah. That was even about the just the haste 5/5 regular cycling for 2 from
Yeah, that went I drafted that cube last night and it went really late.
It's not that good, I don't think.
I think it's pretty good.
It's fine, but
okay.
It's fine, but it doesn't hang with just playing a Deranged Tournament on 5, like
sometimes you don't draw your Deranged Tournament on 5.
You would know. So anyway, I'm going to try those out and see how they go. I'm happy to boost the cycling archetype a little bit because I think it is latent at the moment right now, or maybe a little bit of a like background theme instead of a premier deck to be playing.
I saw some Lightning Rift happening yesterday.
Oh, great. You'll love to hear it. That's the best kind of thing to be seeing. So yeah, I'm going to try those out and see how it goes. I will say, this is like classic. I don't really want to spend time being salty, but really dislike the frame for these cards in a big, big way. When I saw this frame on the Warhammer 40k cards, I thought it was a Warhammer 40k frame, and I thought it looked great. I was like, this looks like Warhammer 40k. It's like extra shiny and metallic in the same way that space armies are shiny and metallic, and it's got this pointy little stamp at the bottom. Like, it felt Warhammer 40k themed. And we find out with this set that it's actually just the Universes Beyond frame, and it applies to anything that is not Magic IP. And I think it is way out of place on these cards, personally, all the cards in this set. So much so that I'm even going, like, extended art where I can in some cases, which is a aesthetic I've otherwise not pursued in my cube, just because I really don't like the frame. So that's one of the biggest downsides, especially for the Neoclassical cube, where I'm going for that old school vibe. These do not feel old school at all.
Yeah, it is funny how appropriate they did feel for Warhammer 40k, and it does feel, I mean, I think I'm used to it by now, but it feels not, it was a surprise. That's what I'll say.
That's it for the Neoclassical cube.
Great, we did it. I have just a couple cards that I'm interested in for the regular cube. Two things which are kind of just like strict upgrades over cards that I think are just a little bit underpowered right now, and some other things I'm curious about. So first up, Improvised Club, 1 and a red, as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature. It deals 4 damage to any target. Heartfire has been in the cube for a long time, and I think it's just a little bit underpowered. The sacrificing a creature is a big cost, so just making it a little bit more flexible. I'm curious to see if that does more stuff.
I like that more, yeah. I've only seen Heartfire used to just cheese people out from 4.
Yes,
like
that's what it's there for.
Okay,
but I think
it
makes it a little bit more flexible when it's like, oh, I have some random.
This is much more likely to be used as actual removal, because it's almost never worth spending 2 mana and a card and a creature to remove a creature in the regular cube. Yeah. But it's totally worth it to kill your opponent. Here, this will actually maybe be used as removal sometimes. Get rid of a treasure token or something and take out a big threat.
The other one is currently I have Broken Wings, which destroys an artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying for 3 mana. And I think I'm going to try, instead of that, Shower of Arrows, which is the same thing, but also Scries. They're both at instant speed. So Scrying is fun, and that is, again, a card that's like, it's definitely a sideboard card. I think this is still a sideboard card, even with the Scry, but I feel better about having it in a deck.
Yeah, nice, clean little, tiny little upgrade.
All right, another one I'm curious about is Stern Scolding. This is blue for an instant counter target creature spell with power or toughness 2 or less. I don't have a ton of counter spells in this environment, but it is a pretty low to the ground environment. I think blue has been a little bit struggling lately. I think this is like a pretty reasonable thing to be doing here. What do you think about this in the regular cube?
I'm very surprised. This is a card you're interested in.
Interesting.
Well, we didn't do a description of your cube. The regular cube is, for those that are new to the show, a like Masters level set cube. So not at the peaks of power level. It plays like a pumped up limited set, in the sense that, just having random 2 drops matters. Creature combat's really important. It's a very fair environment. And you have, in many cases, avoided the best rate versions of effects and kind of gone like 1 tick below. And one of those places you've done that is counterspells. So
for sure,
you have a number of cancel variants in the cube right now, like 3 mana counterspells. And what kind of counter magic do you actually have at 2 mana?
There's a couple. There's some quench variants, Censor, Essence Scatter, and Capture, although I'm going to be fiddling with those a little bit. Negate as well, and actually Protect the Negotiators. I forgot I added that. That's kind of a cool one.
And then you have any counter magic at 1 mana right now?
I do not at 1 mana. This would be the first one, unless you want to count Syncopate.
That's definitely 2 mana and above. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Stern Scolding is good in the regular cube. I have given it a lot of thought for the Bun Magic cube, which we'll talk about in a bit, maybe. It feels weird. Like,
okay.
Do you still think that counterspell, blue counter target spell, is like too good for this cube?
Honestly, probably not. I mean,
I don't think
there is a limit on how too good a 1-for-1 interaction spell can be at all.
Right.
So, like, even if I put Swords to Plowshares in here, it would stand out as being one of the best cards in the cube, but it wouldn't be dictating games and feel like it's the thing that shapes the way that the gameplay works. So I feel the same way about counterspells, and this feels more appropriate than blue counterspell, classic counterspell, just because it is more focused towards what the cube is about, which is like small creatures.
I guess I can do part of my little Stern. I have a whole speech here planned out for Stern Scolding. I wasn't.
You want to wait till we get to your cube?
No, it's fine. So traditionally, Remove Soul, which is 1 in a blue counter target creature spell, has been a much worse card than Negate, 1 in a blue counter target non-creature spell. And I think there's good reasons for that, and it's not because non-creature spells are better. It's because there are many ways to deal with creatures in Magic the Gathering. Lots of colors have ways to deal with them. You have removal spells for them. You can block them. Creatures are like a fundamentally interactive part of the game. Whereas non-creature spells oftentimes just resolve, and their effect has been had. And so if you didn't counter it, then there is no other way to counteract the effect the spell is going to have. Or it might be a permanent type that is much harder to get off the board once it's in play. Maybe you're playing red and they resolve an enchantment. You're playing red-blue, they resolve an enchantment. What are you going to do now? And so for that reason, I think Stern Scolding deserves to be compared almost to like 1 mana removal than it does to other counter magic.
Sure,
obviously,
it's almost like a disfigure.
Obviously, it's timing dependent because you have to cast it at the right moment, but it is kind of weird in blue because, like, yeah, historically, like, even though Remove Soul or Essence Scatter or whatever is 1 in a blue, effectively remove any creature, because of that timing restriction, it's like, well, I'll just play Doomblade or whatever. I'll play something that lets me do that, but later, because it gives me more options for when I get to cast it. I don't have to hold up mana. It's, like, more flexible. Whereas Negate gives you something unique that only blue can do, for the most part. So my initial read of this card was that it was not that great. The thing to keep in mind is that in many cubes, we see tons of creatures now with Enter the Battlefield abilities.
Yes.
More and more over Magic's history, there are just more creatures that have Enter the Battlefield abilities, which makes sense. It's a very clean and satisfying design space to have, to go all in on a creature that has no Enter the Battlefield abilities. It can be kind of a bummer against removal, and conversely, to have just big spells that have effects with no creatures in play is also very committal in the other direction. And I think, moderately sized creatures with some Enter the Battlefield value has been a space they've been playing in for a decade in terms of just making really balanced game pieces. And my initial thought was, how many of the Enter the Battlefield creatures with value are actually going to be small versus you're paying more mana for a bigger creature and therefore you get the Enter the Battlefield value? And I think it's actually a lot of them. So I haven't done this math for the regular cube. I did it for the Bud Magic cube. I'll talk about the specifics when we get there, but I think it's going to be really good in the Bud Magic cube for that reason alone, and it's probably going to be good here for similar reasons. It feels very out of place to me, the idea that you have 1 mana counter magic now for probably a decent chunk of all the creatures in the cube.
And it is power or toughness. It's not converted mana cost, so
right.
It does hit Slingang Lieutenant and Grave Shifter and some of these big things that, Newscraft Mob.
It hits 80% of all the creatures in my cube.
Wow, that's
I don't know about
surprising.
yours, but it hits 80% of all of mine. So it feels out of place to me in the regular cube, frankly. It's not the kind of cube where you can expect to have your really meaningful spell countered by 1 mana. That's just not a thing that cube does.
All right, I think that's a reasonable point. I think I will still try it, but we'll see.
Okay.
Great. The card that I'm even more skeptical of, which I think you're going to be excited about,
Legolas.
is Legolas Master Archer. 1 green for a 1/4 legendary creature, elf archer. It has reach. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Legolas Master Archer, put a 1/1 counter on Legolas. Period. Whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you don't control, Legolas deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature. This card's kind of nuts. There's a little bit of heroic theme in this cube that touches green a little bit, with things like split burn spells to back it up. I think this card is going to be kind of a beating if you, cast this and then cast a Chandra's Pyrohelix targeting this and something else.
I mean, even just this and a fight spell.
Or a fight spell.
Because fight spells already target one of your creatures, which you can make Legolas, and also one of your opponent's creatures. So
you immediately
essentially get
both
2
triggers.
fights and also a +1/+1 counter.
So I'm going to try it on the bounds of it fits thematically with stuff that's happening in the cube, but I am not optimistic this will last very long.
I think it's really good. My least favorite part about it is the 1/4 reach type line.
Yeah.
Which I think is very defensive. But
on the other hand, green does have a really hard time with flying, and I would rather it be a 2/3 reach or something like that, but...
Well, what I was going to say is, I misevaluated Ledger Shredder initially because I saw that it was a 1/3 and with 1 trigger could grow to a 2/4 flyer, and I was like, this is such a defensive stat line, it's just going to lead to board stalls and no good attacks. But actually, because it grows, it just becomes a huge threat on its own, and it's very aggressive. It happens to have 2 more toughness than it does power, but if it started as a 1/1, I think Ledger Shredder would still be pretty okay, and it very quickly becomes a threat for your own purposes for attacking. I think if you're growing this at all, if your deck is built around this, it's not actually going to lead to any sort of board stall because you're just going to crush your opponent. You're going to remove all the creatures with fight spells and fight triggers, and then just swing in with your 3/5 Legolas and crush everybody.
Yeah,
I like it here though because this is, and I saw multiple people on the Discord mention this card to you. People see this card and are like, this is exactly what he's trying to do with the regular cube. It is so thematically on point with all of the things, the heroic, the divided damage burn, the fight spells, all the things that you like.
It really is.
And I think your power outliers should be cards that are around the themes of the cube. So is this probably the new best card in green? I think it is. I think this is probably the best green card in the cube. I would rather it be this than, I don't know, what's the current best green card in the cube? Saddled Rhymestag?
Probably. I mean, I was going to say Earl of Squirrel.
It's definitely not Earl of Squirrel.
But you gave you gave a correct answer.
Earl of Squirrel, I think, is in the running for the worst green card in the cube, frankly.
I think it's in the top 95%.
So yeah, I just like this more than having Ren's Run Hydra or Sylvan Advocate or Courser of Krufix being the power outliers in green. Like this, or even Honored Hydra. Like this is so much more what the cube is about.
True, yeah.
That I love this as the most powerful green card, and I'm going to say that right up until I lose to it like 4 times in a row, and then I might be mad about it.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's still a 3-mana creature you have to do other stuff with. It still dies to a decent amount of removal. The 4 toughness is kind of a decent hedge against that, so something to keep in mind. It'd be a 3/6, I guess. It's going to be a big boy. So yeah, I don't know. I think this card, I really want to play with this card in the regular cube, because I think it's a cool card. It's perfect for the environment, and I would love for it to be one of the power outliers.
All right, cool. That's what I got. Just 4 cards.
We can decide before CubeCon if you think it's too good
definitely.
to take out. So tune in. What's the lock-in date? Like mid-September or something? Yeah, tune in mid-September to see if Anthony is still on Legolas, Master Archer.
What you got next?
First, I got nothing for the Degenerate Microcube. I didn't do a super close reading, so I'm going to ask a little crowdsourcing here. If you think I missed a card that would be really good in my small cube with small decks, all about nothing but the most degenerate, rude combos, I'd love to hear it. I'm wondering if I've missed something here, because there are a lot of good cards, and it's hard to recontextualize all of my evaluations constantly. So let me know if I missed something for that cube. Maybe there's something here that's good enough. But the Bud Magic Cube, there are 5 cards I'm interested in playing. And this is one of the first times, Anthony, for this set review, I have all these cards sitting in front of me. I just got the order in yesterday, traded for the last couple, so I got the cards right here. So the Bud Magic Cube, for those that don't know, this is my main cube. It is a very low-curving, fast, efficient environment. I aim for it to play like fair decks in Constructed Legacy. So you're playing fair Magic. It's all about creature combat, no real combos, but it's a very high-power environment. So the tempo of the game can turn on a single card. You can go from winning to losing with your opponent playing a single card and vice versa. A lot of back and forth. So the first card I'm interested in is, I'm going to go in order of least interest to most interest, or the least confident is going to stick around in my cube to the most confident is going to stick around. Number 5 is Anduril, Flame of the West. Did I say that right? I'm sure I didn't. You know what they say, if someone mispronounces a word, it's because they learned it in a book, so you don't make fun of them. Anduril, Flame of the West. This is a legendary artifact equipment for 3 generic mana. It gives equipped creature +3/+1, and whenever equipped creature attacks, create 2 tapped 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. If that creature is legendary, instead create 2 of those tokens that are tapped and attacking, and it has equip 2. A really pushed equipment. I think this is most easy to compare to the Swords of X and Y cycle, because they have the exact same casting cost and equip cost, which is 3 and 2, and those are 2 really important numbers to look at, obviously, when you're evaluating equipment. What you get in exchange is more power boost, less toughness boost. Instead of +2/+2, you get +3/+1, which, if you're attacking, I think will very often be better.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fine to be trading off your creatures with equipment and then just re-equipping, so I think that it's almost more powerful.
Well, especially in this case, because what this one does is just give you 2 spirit tokens every time you attack.
Just either put that on those spirits.
Either attacking themselves or not. And interestingly, you know, them not attacking is not necessarily a downside here. You know, depending on
they are still tapped, so you're not blocking with them immediately.
Right, but you might be throwing them into bad attacks anyway, where you might just want to keep them back. So what this card does really well is just fuel itself. And equipment in my cube is historically a little worse than everyone expects. So I have Umezawa's Jite in my cube. I have Skull Clamp, Grafted War Gear, a couple of other equipments in there. And especially like Jite, a lot of people draft my cube for the first time and report that Jite was nowhere near as good as they expected. They thought it would be a huge bomb, and it was just fine. And that's because I have a ton of cheap removal. It's actually a big investment to spend 2 mana casting the card and 2 mana equipping it, and often 2 mana equipping it again when your first equip trigger gets removed, to actually connect and get that benefit. The fact that this, once you get that first connection, it will be near impossible to stop you from connecting again in the future, because now you have to just draw 2 removal spells for every time they get to attack with a creature holding Anduril. So it is a really high investment card. It's a high raw power level and high investment because you are spending 5 mana, but the payoff is there. I'm only wondering if this is going to lead to like frustrating play patterns of now I just have infinite spirits and I'm just attacking with one every turn and getting infinite spirits, and maybe that's not so fun. But I'm curious if it can hang on power level, and if it does, how those play patterns are going to be.
Yeah, you just got to make one of those spirits your ring bearer, and then it's legendary, and then it makes more attacking spirits.
I don't love the fact that it cares about legendary creatures, to be honest.
That's going to be relevant. Like, that's a lot of the creatures in your cube at this point.
I think maybe fewer than you think. Looks like 30.
30 out of 150 creatures. That is
Well,
less than
It's actually
expected.
130 creatures. It shows you the number based on the maybe board, too, which is a bug on Cube Cover now,
right.
which is really annoying.
I filed a GitHub issue for that.
Great. It actually might be showing that 30 might also be part of the maybe board, too. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 8 of those are in the maybe board. So it's actually 22 out of 130.
That is less than I expected.
And a lot of them are things like not a lot, but like I got like Uro and Croxa. Like, they're not going to be carrying this order. It's not going to matter. Like, they're already killing you for attacking with it.
You wait.
It really matters on stuff like Kithian, Thalia, Adeline, other
Ragavan.
Thalia. That's kind of the ones that actually matter. Luris actually is going to be well, I guess you can't play it in Luris decks. There you go. Perfect. It's perfectly balanced.
You can still put Luris in the main deck.
Yeah, no, you don't. I kind of wish the legendary thing wasn't there because it just adds some complexity to the card, which you have to remember, but is not going to come up that often. You're certainly not going to like draft around that. It's just going to happen sometimes.
Daniel will.
Yeah, sure. Daniel's always watching the legendary type line. But, you know, I have taken all of the combo equipment out of my Stoneforge Mystic package, which is to say I don't run Batterskull anymore. I never ran Cauldra because that card offends my sensibilities. But my Stoneforge packages are all about essentially just like card advantage and a toolbox. Like, go get your Glimmer Lens, or go get your Rabbit Battery, or go get your Lion Sash. Like, it's not about cheating mana or doing some like big combo. And so I'm interested to have this as like the flashiest thing you can do with the Stoneforge Mystic package, and go get this big equipment and see if it's good enough. See if the reward is there for spending 5 mana and a card to get to attack once. So we'll see. Next up, the card I'm fourth most interested in from Lord of the Rings is Flame of Anor. 1 blue-red for an instant, and you may choose one. Target player draws 2 cards, destroy target artifact, or Flame of Anor deals 5 damage to target creature. So we got a modal spell that is either an instant speed divination or essentially hard removal. 5 damage is going to destroy almost every creature in my cube, or destroy an artifact. But if you control a wizard as you cast a spell, you instead get to choose 2, which is cracked. I've already seen Aspiring Spike brewing with this in Modern. There's a lot of incidental wizards just floating around. The interaction with Snapcaster Mage is a fairly obvious one here. That's a wizard, so you're just going to always get that ability, pretty much. This card is really powerful, and I love my modal gold spells. I love all the various commands. I think it's a cool payoff for playing multiple colors in this environment to get these modal spells that often represent 2-for-1s, right? The commands almost always do represent possibly some like virtual card advantage or literal card advantage. And this one, if you control wizard, is by far the best of all of them. I will say it's only my 4th most interested card, and I'm not like super sold on it because I don't know about this like rider of controlling a wizard. This feels like kind of a random reward you're just going to get sometimes. And the card is never awful. Like, it's fine as a base rate, but the reward of kill your thing, draw 2 cards, instant speed, that's a 3-for-1, which is, I don't know. It's pretty cracked when you do get to do that thing. And kind of similar to the Legendary Matters thing on Anduril, I don't really think it's going to change your drafting. You're not going to like seek out wizards more highly once you have Flame of Anor. You're just going to sometimes get that benefit. So, I don't know. I honestly think I might just end up going back to Prismari Command, which is not as powerful, but I think is a decent bit cleaner than Flame of Anor.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit weird specifically in this cube. I do think Wizard Tribal is like one of the coolest and easiest tribes to support, and there is like a lot of overlap between wizards and spellcasting, so there's a lot of cool ways to build that into a cube. This card individually, I think it's a lot of the power lies in the fact that the modes are very distinct. Like, they don't overlap a lot. Drawing 2 cards and destroying an artifact and destroying a creature are all going to be relevant in very different situations, which makes the modality here really powerful. I don't know. I mean,
it doesn't spark joy for me, is what it comes down to.
Sure.
Like, I look at K-Command and I'm like, I love this card. I adore it. I love everything about it. This one, ostensibly kind of similar, but it's just a little bit weirder, clunkier. It doesn't feel as nicely contained.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to have seen just 1 blue instant draw 2 cards before this. But that's not the world we live in.
Get Archmage's Charm.
That is a very different card than what I just described.
All right, my number 3 card is Stern Scolding. I've already given a big part of my speech here, but I did do a pretty thorough analysis of my cube. Like I insinuated, I initially was like, I have so much 1-mana removal that anything that Stern and Scolding would counter, you could just remove. Why do I need this counterspell? And after looking at my cube, so it does hit, like I said, 80% of my creatures. 103 out of 130 creatures in my cube get hit by Stern and Scolding. And that does include some of the more expensive stuff. Pia and Kieran Nalar has 2 power and toughness. So it hits almost all my creatures. Then I looked at how many of them had some kind of enter the battlefield value, or some value that Stern Scolding would stop your opponent from accruing, that a removal spell would not stop them from accruing. And I found that 40 of the 103 creatures have some value there, which is 40% essentially of the creatures this can counter. You're going to be doing a little better than a removal spell. 25 of those have some kind of guaranteed value, like some enter the battlefield ability, your Baleful Strixes, your Pia and Kieran Nalars, your Seasoned Pyromancers, cards that you would much rather Stern Scolding than remove. 13 of them have likely value. This is almost all entirely related to whether or not this creature is cast with mana up or with the ability to follow it up with a spell. So all your Clarion Spirits, Monastery Mentors, Ledger Shredders, things that are likely to accrue value because most of the time you're going to play these when you have the ability to immediately trigger them, or something like Lion Sash or Scavenging Ooze, which you'll often wait till you can play and also activate. Those ones are probably closer to being, equally countered and removed, but still rather Stern Scolding it than not. And then 2 that are just hard to remove, and in my cube, that's just Seasoned Howlblade and Guardian of New Benalia. Other cubes I know have more non-interactive threats, your like True Name Nemesis and stuff, which just obviously gets rid of, and removal spells don't. In my case, I just have those 2, and those 2 can still be disfigured or whatever because they just get indestructible, not hexproof or anything. Ultimately, I think I'm pretty high on Stern Scolding, higher than I was before I crunched all these numbers in my cube. I think it's a really good card, and if it's not good in my cube, then I don't know where it's good, because my cube is so low curving, and there are so many scary creatures with 2 or less power or toughness that I think if it's not good here, I don't know where it's good.
Yeah, I think people are going to be surprised by the things that it hits. Like, it does hit Moloch and Stone Coil Serpent, right? Because those enter with those counters, but on the stack, they still have power, toughness.
It will not hit Tarmogoyf, which does actually have the power and toughness on the stack.
That's a star, not an XX. But yeah, I mean, there's just going to be a bunch of cases where it's like, oh, I can counter that.
Yeah. So I think a card's going to be really good. Yeah, I'm always in the market for another 1-mana counterspell because that's something I do have in a decent high density in my cube. I am a big fan of Spell Snare in my cube. I think it's really good in the Bud Magic cube, and I think this is a similar space. Probably even better, honestly, than Spell Snare.
I have not adjusted to Spell Snare yet. People cast it, and I'm like, oh, I forgot you could do that.
It's really good. I always cast it, and people are like, how much do I have to pay? And I'm like, no.
No.
You misunderstand.
You have already done it.
You've already paid the price.
Exactly, too.
All right, the card I'm second most excited about is Orcish Bowmasters. This is 1 and a black for a creature Orc Archer. It is a 1/1 with Flash. When Orcish Bowmasters enters the battlefield, and whenever an opponent draws a card, except for the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmasters deals 1 damage to any target, then Amass Orcs 1. I posted about this card on Twitter and said, do we think this is going to be a fun cube card? And the reason I posted that question is because I thought we all already agreed this was absolutely cracked on power level, and to my shock from the responses, seems like not everyone thinks this is absolutely cracked on power level. My only concern about this card is that it's going to be too good in this cube. I have no other concerns about it.
It's going to be too good in a way that I could see being really punishing and frustrating. When you cast a Brainstorm and someone casts this and makes a 1/1 and a 3/3 and deals 4 damage to something, is that right? Am I
a 1/1 and a 4/4?
1/1 and a 4/4
and deals 4 damage.
And deals 4 damage to something. They for 2 mana
4 damage divided, so you can go like gun and they kill your 2-drop. Yeah,
or just deal 4 to you.
Yep.
This card's a lot.
And that's obviously the best case scenario. I think some people did miss on their first reading that you just get to do it once no matter what. So the baseline is raise the alarm plus a damage.
Gut shot.
Which is already a great rate. In this cube, lots of stuff has 1 toughness and just dies to 1 damage removal. Lava Dart is great. So Orcish Bowmasters is going to continue to be great. This card is, I think, definitely going to reshape Legacy. I've been watching some Legacy players play with this on Magic Online, and this is a card that I actually think in Singleton is going to be kind of fun. Like, I don't think this is going to have toxic, bad play patterns in my cube, aside from maybe being a little too good, but we'll have to find out as we go. But I do think it has toxic play patterns in multiples and in the mirror. there's so many times I saw already in like the first 2 leagues I've watched people playing this card where you're playing Bowmasters mirrors and it's just they flash in Bowmasters, I flash in Bowmasters to Bowmasters, they're Bowmasters, they Bowmasters, my Bowmasters.
That's kind of cute.
Until that's all Legacy is anymore, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's actually going to really affect the heuristics of Legacy. Like, I think people have gotten comfortable with, like, here's how I know when to cast my Brainstorm, and here's when I do this and that. I think this card's going to totally shake up all that stuff, which will be interesting to see how it plays out. I expect this will become a hated card in Legacy.
I expect so, yeah.
Just because of what I just described. The, like, Bowmaster's Mirror is kind of awful. I like the card design. I like that it's removal, and I also like the kind of Punisher effect this is. I'm totally okay with Punisher effects. I have 3-mana Leovold in my cube. I have Thalias. I have Esper Sentinels. I like cards that change the cost of things and make your opponents reevaluate their actions based on some limitation you've put on them. And this is my preferred way to do it over something like Leovold, even though I do still include Leovold, which just stops the thing outright, right? Instead of stopping this outright, your opponent can still cast their Brainstorm if they want. They're just acknowledging that they get to give you an Arc Lightning and a 3/3.
Yeah, that's a great point. In addition to this being, like, really nuts if you flash it in response to a Brainstorm, this kind of just says, like, you can't cast your Brainstorm. This just tells blue players they can't really cast a bunch of cards, or they have to have a way to deal with the Orcish Bowmasters first, or...
I mean, if you're playing a control deck, you're still going to cast your Brainstorm and dig for your board wipe, and you're just going to take 3 damage, and like, all right, whatever. Like,
yeah, that's true.
You know, I might even shoot your Planeswalker down, which would be kind of good. I think the card's really, 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 really powerful. Mm-hmm. The other reason I'm excited about it here is that I think it is going to be the new headline reason to be playing black. It'll be the thing you take that pulls you into playing black. And honestly, I think my cube is kind of missing that right now. I think other cards have more appealing headline cards, and black, like the best black card I would say is probably like Dark Confidant, probably. But in my experience, people are not like windmill slamming Dark Confidant, pack one, pick one, and being happy to do it. I think people are correctly going to do that with Orcish Bowmasters in due time when they have come to understand its power. So my only concern here is, will this be too good? And I don't think it will be, because in the same way that this thing is good in that it removes 1 toughness creatures, it also has 1 toughness. I have so much instant speed removal. Like, I think it is going to be the kind of thing where it gets you some value and then it gets removed, instead of a thing where it like takes over a whole game most of the time. And I think the times where it is flashed in response to a Brainstorm or a Jace activation or a Treasure Cruise are going to be not the baseline play pattern. And so when that happens, it'll be like more of an interesting moment.
Look at that.
A notable game moment than it will be like, this is what the card always does. And that's why people don't like it. So we'll see.
I see 2 issues with this. One is that you love cantrips and will just look for every reason to jam cantrips in your deck. And I think this is a legit reason, like, if your opponent has this card, you don't necessarily want to be casting a bunch of cantrips. You'd rather just have more replaceable effects. And I think people are going to call you out on that and be like, Andy, don't be playing all these cantrips. And I think that's going to frustrate you.
No, people can call me out all they want. I'm going to keep doing it.
I think the second issue is this is going to make people think a lot about, do the cards actually say draw a card, or do they say look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one into your hand? And
which is a bummer.
It's going to happen a lot with especially like red impulsive draw and things like that people are just going to get tripped up by effects, which is going to be a thing.
To be fair, it's something you already have to care about in this cube. There's already like Fairy Vandal, and your Sleight of Hand doesn't work with Fairy Vandal, and it's like a bummer. Hey, this is another opportunity to prove that Portent is actually better than Ponder sometimes, because it's not the second card you drew outside of your draw step. Actually, does this still track?
Oh yeah, actually.
Nope, it still does. It still does trigger.
Never mind.
It still triggers on the. It's not your second each turn. It's a card outside of the first one in your draw step. So
okay, so it's not like Narset.
Yep.
It's not like
it's different than. It's a little different than all of them. This also something I've been thinking about more lately, which I'm actually working on writing a little article about, if I can bring myself to finish it, which is hard because writing is difficult. Is this idea we talked about on the podcast a long time ago in our episode talking about Ragavan and Lelia, and about having power outliers being at lower mana values and therefore not the highest raw power level in the cube, right? Like, Orcish Bowmasters is good. Your opponent can just untap and play a Seeker's Chariot. And it's like, okay, well, I got my Raise the Alarm plus 1 damage. Mm-hmm. I'm still losing, like, it's still not the highest raw power level thing in the cube by any margin, because it's 2 mana. So, is it one of the most powerful cards relative to its mana cost? Certainly. But I think I'm more comfortable with that than, like, this is actually in a similar space, I think, to, like, Sheoldred. It's probably better than Sheoldred. I think it's going to see more legacy play than Sheoldred does. But I like the play patterns of this more than Shoulder, which was in the cube and then subsequently cut, because Shoulder just says, answer this or you literally lose the game. And this will not literally lose you the game if you don't answer it. You can play against it for many turns. You can even cast your Brainstorm into it if you have to, and it's not going to end the game on the spot the way that Shoulder does.
Unless your opponent has Sylvan Library.
That is a May.
It is a May. I checked that, but I said it anyway.
And you can probably guess that the card I'm most excited about from Lord of the Rings is Reprieve, the white Remand. It's 1 and a white for an instant, return target spell to its owner's hand, and draw a card. Clean. Simple. I love Remand. I think it fits in white. The only thing I'm upset about is the card frame and the art. Sorry to Justina Dura. It's a perfectly fine drawing, but it doesn't say anything about what the card does to me on it, so I look forward to a non-Universes Beyond printing of this card, which I hope we'll get someday. I do have a tiny soapbox about this card, though, because I've seen some banter around the internet about how this is going to be better than Remand in cubes, because white is a aggressive color, and this is a like tempo counterspell, and so it's going to be better in aggressive decks where you have creatures in play. I don't think that's entirely true. I think this is going to be worse than Remand. Calling that shot here. We'll see if I still agree with this in 12 months or whatever. And it's not because of the color specifically, but because of decks that can afford to hold up 2 mana.
Yeah.
This is also where Sam Black's concept of big and small games comes into play when you look at something like Reprieve versus Memory Lapse, or Remand versus Memory Lapse. Remand obviously being counter their spell, you draw a card. So everyone's still card neutral, right? You just took their spell, put it back in their hand, you replaced the Remand that was in your hand, you effectively kind of just like took a thing off the stack, undid it. So they wasted whatever mana they spent on the spell, but it's like keeping the game neutrally sized. Memory Lapse, on the other hand, counters a spell but puts it on top of your opponent's library instead. You don't draw a card. So it has a very similar effect in the sense that next turn they can just do it again, but now you're both down a card. So between those two cards, Remand is leading to bigger games, and Memory Lapse is leading to smaller games. I don't think you really want to cast a Reprieve in your mono-white aggro deck. And I could be wrong about this, but I don't think that's going to be pound for pound worth the slot most of the time. I think the vast majority of the time, this is almost a blue-white gold card. It's going to end up in a deck with other counter spells where people are able to hold up mana effectively and want to be playing to a big game. They want to have more cards in their hand. They don't care if their opponent also has more cards, because they know as the game goes on and gets grindier into the late game, they're just going to overwhelm them with their strategy or generate some massive card advantage with a board wipe or something. If we got a white Memory Lapse, then I would feel differently. I think in that case, and I think we do already have one, a Lapse of Certainty, but it costs 3 mana, so we ignore that for right now. I just don't want people to write in about it. If we got 1 and a white counter target spell, put it on top of its owner's library, I think that might see more play in just like straight up aggressive decks that don't otherwise have reasons to hold up mana. But I think most of the time, if your aggressive deck is planning to curve out, you're not going to stop curving out to hold up 2 mana unless you already have your opponent on like a 2-turn clock, which you won't until a few turns into the game, is my suggestion here. So I love the card. It's super clean. I don't see it going anywhere in my cube anytime soon. I don't think it's as good as Remand because it is a cost to be able to hold up mana, and this is fundamentally a card that wants to go in a deck that's playing to a big game. Hey, it's Andy here. I can't help but abuse my powers as the editor to add a little more context here because I just want to make sure my point is clear. I think it's kind of hard to take a step back and look at the full range of contexts in which your aggressive deck might be casting a Memory Lapse versus a Remand and understand why the big game, small game distinction actually matters here. So to give like one clear example, right? Let's just say that it's, turn 3 and your opponent is going to cast a blocker for your attackers and you have Remand versus you have Memory Lapse, right? You have Remand, you put the card back in their hand, great. The next turn, they might just play a land and cast a board wipe, and now they still have that creature in their hand that they were going to block with, that they were otherwise just going to buy time with before they had to cast their board wipe, but now they actually have the board wipe. Whereas if you had Memory Lapsed, then you might have taken them off of that 4th land to actually cast that board wipe because they're down a card. That card they drew for turn that was unknown, that wasn't the card you just countered, could have been their 4th land, could have been their board wipe, could have been something more relevant to do than the thing they had already done the turn prior. And that's why if you're a small game deck, which most aggressive decks are, you just want to be removing options from your opponent, not giving them more options. So yes, in the example of the board wipe, it doesn't matter how you counted the board wipe, whether it's Remand or Memory Lapse, you countered it, you got a turn, it's good. But there are plenty of situations where it does really matter whether they're up a card or down a card, and that's just one example of where that comes up. I'm fully prepared to be flamed in the comments if people disagree. Looking forward to your feedback.
I see what you're saying. I don't know if I totally agree. There are definitely going to be matchups where you all do have your opponent on a short clock because you did start aggressively, and you really just want this to delay a wrath for a turn. That's not going to be every matchup.
That is the thing it does best by far.
Yeah.
Because anything else they would play, you would much rather just have a removal spell for. Like, if they're going to try and play a stabilizing blocker, just remove it, because the removal spell is way more flexible, and you don't have to hold up mana to cast it, right? You can still curve out, and then untap, and then remove the thing and attack for lethal. So it's specifically really good against wraths, and that is true. And notably, this does counter Supreme Verdict, which actually makes it mechanically different than Remand, because I believe Remand says counter the spell, but put it back in its owner's hand.
I don't think that's true.
It does. Counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it into its owner's hand. So you can't Remand a Supreme Verdict, but you can Reprieve a Supreme Verdict. That's one thing that's notable in some cubes, my cube being one of them. Someone will get their Supreme Verdict reprieved, and it will be a notable game moment.
What am I thinking of that?
Unsubstantiate?
It's possible. Or Jace. Not Jace. The other one.
Unsubstantiate just wanted a blue return target permanent or spell to its owner's hand.
Sure. Who's the 4-mana creature that does that?
Venser?
Venser. Like Jace, but slightly different.
Pretty different.
Okay.
Yeah, Venser doesn't counter either, but Remand does counter. So Remand can't hit your Supreme Verdict. This can. So yeah, if your aggro decks just need another answer to a board wipe, I mean, I would much rather have a Selfless Spirit, but Reprieve also can do that job sometimes. But then also, you're never able to tap out for your 3 or 4 mana spell until you have 5 or 6 mana, if that's going to be your answer to a board wipe. You're just going to be waiting to do it. So, I don't know. That's my hot take about Reprieve, is I'm excited about it. It's the card I'm most excited about. Don't misconstrue any of this for not being excited about it, but I think Remand is the better card and will probably be better in more cubes. This one's cleaner than Remand, though. Doesn't say
true.
counter the spells or all this stuff. Just put it back in its hand, draw a card. Beautiful.
I've got 2 cards for the Turbo Cube. Whoop whoop. So this is a cube where all spells and activated abilities cost 2 generic mana less to cast or activate. It's sort of a silly environment where everybody's kind of storming off at each other. Wizard Rockets is unfortunately something that I pretty much have to include.
What do you mean, unfortunately?
This is 1 mana for an artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it has X, sacrifice Wizard's Rocket, add X mana in any combination of colors. When it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card.
We were all waiting for better Terrarian, right? That was a card we were all waiting to get.
It's true. I mean, at this point, this cube is just so full of these, like, dinky little... Not dinky. I mean, these extremely powerful mana-producing card neutral or card positive effect. So, this is free to cast. It costs X to activate, but you get 2 for free on top of that X. So you can just make 2 mana of any colors for no mana, and you can even dump more mana into it if you have it, if you need to filter for particular colors, which is, I think, going to be pretty relevant.
And that's, to me, the upside in this card. I mean, I think this is half a tier below the absolute best cards in the cube because it comes into play tapped. And so much happens in one turn.
Yeah.
So Terrarian was in the cube for a long time, and it was always really good, but, a noticeable tick below your Chromatic Stars, your Actual Eggs, your Guild Globes, because...
Actual eggs.
Actual literal
like
eggs.
Like people say actual power. And
this, I think, is a little better than that because of that specific reason. I think cards like Burgi, which make a bunch of red mana. Mm-hmm. You do have Gaia's Cradle in this cube.
Yes.
Which makes a bunch of green mana. There's a lot of ways sometimes to make a bunch of mana of specific colors, or even, honestly, like, your eggs make colored mana. You don't...
But you're restricted, and you're going to play them no matter what.
You're not playing. You're not like, oh, I can't play this Sungrass Egg because I'm playing red black. You jam Sungrass Egg in your red black deck.
Because the baseline is you still filter, or you still just draw a card, so it's free cycling. So you're going to play it. But yeah, this gives you a way to actually use that mana.
Yeah, but it'll have to be a turn later. So it's like, if this is in my opening hand, I'm planning to go off turn 2, not turn 1, because I want to be able to filter all of that arbitrary mana into colors that I actually care about.
Yeah.
I think it's just enough better. And I think you cut Terrarian not because it was like bad overall, but because it was like just a little bit of a bummer compared to all the other stuff, and it wasn't worth another broken card that was just a little less broken than all the other broken stuff. This, I think, at the very least, it's like very cool flavorfully. The art's more fun. It's got like kind of goofy. It feels kind of goofy. It feels much more appropriate to the theme of the cube than Terrarium, Terrarium was taking itself too seriously. This is fun.
Exactly. I mean, it's the Turbo Cube. Let's launch some rockets and see what happens.
Exactly.
It'll be fine. In a very different vein, we got Boromir, Warden of the Tower, 2 and a white, or we should just read that as 1 white mana. For a 3/3 legendary creature human soldier, it has vigilance. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana were spent to cast it, counter that spell. You can also sacrifice it, and creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and the ring tempts you.
Ooh.
That's all there. The Turbo Cube, I'm definitely a little bit more lax about some of my
admit it, you don't love
personal
it. So
restrictions.
you
I don't love
it,
that.
So no, I'm saying you don't love the cube, so you'll put a card in that you're less picky about the child you love less.
I'm a little bit less picky. Bergie, you just mentioned, is a double face card, and the backside of Bergie really doesn't matter, but the
regular
card does
the
seem
regular
very...
cube is like the child you're like making beautiful organic food for, and then you're like, here, have a high kid.
I don't know why you would not simply cook one meal for both children, but
hey man,
I'm not a parent.
This is your cubes we're talking about. You tell me.
Have
a fruit roll up
text
for fun.
That text is there, but the key thing is this just prevents your opponent from casting, and it prevents you, actually. No, never mind. This one is not symmetrical. Prevents your opponent from doing a bunch of broken stuff. This card's going to be very strong. I'm trying to promote a white hate bears type deck to just give a little more texture to the environment and make the really unfair decks have a plan B if they actually want to 3-0 a draft. So this fits the bill.
Yep, it does fit the bill. I think you got to try it. It might be too good.
It's going to be really good on the play, but that is true of a lot of cards in this environment.
Right, and even if you survive to your first turn on the draw, it's also going to be really good.
If you survive.
Well,
it's really true.
If your coffin doesn't have all but one nail in it by the time your first turn starts, then this is going to, I think, just be a hard lock for a lot of people's decks. They're not going to have any... It's going to be like, did you actually draft removal? And a lot of people are going to say, no, I didn't. I'm a greedy little piggy boy. I didn't draft removal. I just drafted eggs. And now our deck's going to do nothing.
And you have to say that.
Yes, I'm a greedy little piggy boy. Yeah, I think you got to try it. I still wish there was some other way to not continue to exacerbate the play-draw problem with the Hate Bears deck. And this feels like it kind of does that still. There's no way around it, right? Like, another good Hate Bear is just going to mean that it's so good on turn one and a little less good if your opponent got to go before you.
My theory is if we can push this deck enough, then the metagame just has to shift. You just can't expect to be drafting a deck. Maybe you sideboard heavily when you're on the play and put all more of your greedy piggy little cards in. But still, I think the more we push this, the better the environment could become.
Yeah, I'm into it.
That's it. That's all I got.
Sick. That's the Turbo Cube. That's the Bun Magic Cube. That's the regular cube, and that's the Neoclassical Cube. And this has been an episode of Lucky Paper Radio.
Happy 3-year anniversary.
Happy 3-year anniversary.
If our podcast was a dog, it could drink now.
All right. This is your absolute last chance to get your surveys in for Lord of the Rings and the corresponding Commander products. So check the show notes and check the banner on our website if you haven't done it already. I'm going to mention one more time that the subreddit is still down. We stand in solidarity with the owners of the subreddit in their protest, but it also means that we have lost a pretty substantial way of connecting with our audience. So post the link to your friends if you have a Cube Discord or your play group has a Facebook group or whatever. Help us spread it around because we've definitely gotten less responses on this one. I think largely because we can't post it to the subreddit. So
yeah, the subreddit was actually just the easiest way that people found all of the Lucky Paper stuff.
For sure. So yeah,
we're shrinking into a little corner over here.
We're not shrinking, but it definitely appreciate anybody helping spread the word as much as you can. And also, I am taking hot takes for this set as always, which I often forget to mention. But if you have a hot take about a specific card, or you think that everyone's wrong about something and you want it on the record that you were right, you can record a little voice memo and send it to mail@luckypaper.co, or send it to me on Discord or Twitter, and I will put it in the show, and we'll have little clips from all the people saying that actually the ring Tempts was cool and great, or whatever.
Sure. If I could do 2 more commercials.
Of course.
And by commercials, I mean more stuff that I want to give to people for free. I just made some big updates to our rotisserie draft spreadsheet template, so it's much easier to host a rotisserie draft now. You just paste in the players and a link to your cube, and it automatically loads the whole list, shuffles your list of players into random seeding. It also even updates the draft sheet if you change the number of picks and when the double picks are. There's a bunch of really janky looking JavaScript that makes all that work, which I think is pretty fun. Go do a rotisserie draft.
It's so sick.
It's a lot of fun. And the other thing is I also built a little integration for Cube Cobra into Google Sheets. So you can find that on
This is for the nerdier
GitHub.
Among you.
If you're a huge nerd and you want your cube list in Google Sheets, you just type in one formula after you paste the script into your Google Sheet and which fields you want to fetch about your cube, and you can get that into Google Sheets, which is really convenient when you're making like updates to your cube and you want to keep track of stuff in a spreadsheet, or you want to do some extra data analysis, things like that.
This is also the green M&M rider to see if Justin Parnell is still listening to the podcast.
Exactly.
Justin, here it is. Here's a way to connect your spreadsheets to Cube Cobra. Really, the other way around.
His process is probably more spreadsheets to Cube Cobra, which you can't do that.
Yes, can't do that. But maybe a reason to encourage you to update your list on Cube Cobra. Then you can just press this button and bring it back into your spreadsheets. Just saying, it's there for you.
Well, that one you don't even press a button. It's just live updates.
Oh, dang.
Which I didn't do in the rotisserie draft because if you want to make updates to the cube, I wanted to make sure it was like, this is what we're drafting. Lock it in,
yeah. Sick. Really
anyway,
cool tools. Definitely
go enjoy
take
those
advantage of
things
these
if you're a nerd.
It is funny that these sound like the end of a podcast where people are like, buy our shirts and come see us on tour. But us, it's just like, we made things for you. Here's presents for you.
Come have them.
We should just call it Presents Time instead of commercials.
Yeah.
That concludes Presents Time, and that concludes this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. All of our music is produced by DJ James and Nasty. All the magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This podcast was produced by Anthony and I, thinking really hard about magic cards and then speaking into microphones about it. Happy 3 years, Anthony.
Happy 3 years, Andy.
Damn, we're old as hell.